Today we will be discussing the case study of Philando Castile. So what happened? On July 6th in 2016, Castile, his girlfriend, and their daughter were pulled over in Falcon Heights, Minnesota by Officer Yanez, who claimed that they resembled robbery suspects from a recent case, and he used their broken taillight as cause for his stop. After walking up and asking for Castile's license and registration, Castile did inform the officer that he had a firearm that he was licensed to carry. He was reaching for his right side, most likely to obtain his license, when the officer began warning him to not grab or reach for the firearm. Castile and his girlfriend both stated multiple times that he was not reaching for it, and Castile still remained facing forward, according to initial accounts from Officer Yanez. At this point, the officer felt threatened enough to fire 7 point-blank shots into Castile's chest, 2 of which pierced his heart, and he died 20 minutes later at the hospital. Castile's girlfriend claimed that the officers didn't even check for a pulse after the fact, and Officer Yanez was charged with 3 felonies, 1 count of second-degree manslaughter, 2 counts of dangerous discharge of a firearm. He was later acquitted of all charges, but fired by the city. So to continue on what happened, we do have the dashcam footage included. The video is graphic, but it is a very good account of the actions during the traffic stop, obviously. It's included in the next slide, hopefully, if you're interested in watching it. I do have the link down on the bottom of this slide as well, in case it doesn't work, because I don't have much faith in my technology skills. So the important times to pay attention to is when Yanez approaches the car, it's around 1 minute in. And then Castile discloses that he has a firearm at 1:35. Then the shots fired by Officer Yanez do ring out at about 1:40. And then if you watch the video or skip ahead until around 8:10, you'll hear the initial interview with Yanez about the incident, where he does claim that he never could see the gun and how nervous he was about the whole situation. So, who was involved? Officer Geronimo Yanez, who is Latino, which we will discuss later, Philando Castile, the victim, Diamond Reynolds, the victim's girlfriend, and then Officer Joseph Krauser, who is the backup officer in the squad car with Yanez. Where did it take place? Like stated before, Falcon Heights, Minnesota. And then when did it take place? July 6th, 2016. So for research and group opinion, our group consensus was that deadly force should not have been used. However, Officer Yanez did testify in court that he saw the gun in Castile's hand. This statement contradicts his initial statements from when he said he could not see the firearm when being interviewed by another officer right after the shooting. It's included in the dashcam footage if you chose to watch it. If they were suspected suspects for robbery, they definitely should have implemented a felony traffic stop, which, as far as I'm aware, was the original opinion when I was looking at some of the police information and reports on this incident, where they would have waited for another squad car, so they would have 4 officers there, and they wouldn't, have followed the same procedure as just a regular traffic stop for a broken taillight like they were pulled over for. How Castile was shot 7 times by an officer who thought he was reaching for a firearm inside his car during a traffic stop. What led to it? Castile was driving around 9 p.m. with his girlfriend and 4-year-old daughter returning from the grocery store. Castile was pulled over by Officer Yanez and another officer for having broken taillights. After the officer asked for his license and registration, Castile informed the officer that there was a firearm. He was very upfront about it and thought that disclosing this information would avoid any possible issues. Yanez told Castile not to reach for it, obviously, and Castile was not reaching for it. He explained he wasn't, as his girlfriend was saying he wasn't reaching for it. Castile was still shot 7 times. What could have been done to prevent it? So Castile could have not disclosed that he had a firearm in the car, which may have stopped this scenario, but if it did come to light that he did have a firearm in the car and didn't say anything, or the officer saw it somehow during the stop, it could have led to this issue or other issues. When the officer told Castile not to reach for it, he could have put his hands on the steering wheel, put his hands up, and asked for instructions from the officer on what to do next, so the officer felt in control and that he knew what was happening in the situation. Castile also could have disclosed the location of the gun in the car. We know that it was in his pocket at the time, but, for playing devil's advocate a little bit, if it was in, like, the glove box or the trunk or somewhere else, where it was out of his reach or it would have been very obvious that he was reaching for it, it could have alleviated the situation, but that's kind of irrelevant since it was in his pocket at the time. And then Castillo could have communicated exactly what he was reaching for if it was to get his license out of his pocket to ease the threat that the officer felt. So even though he was going near where the gun was, he was saying definitively what he was getting and why he was reaching over there. So to play devil's advocate directly, Castile did not disclose what he was actually reaching for, like I was just discussing. He said he wasn't reaching for a gun, but if he was a little bit more upfront, was like, I'm getting my wallet to get my license, like, et cetera, it may have helped out a little bit. The officer could have felt threatened by the sole fact that Castile had a gun in the first place, which speaks to the training of the officer more than the situation alone, but if the officer wasn't trained properly to handle situations where there are firearms with civilians in a situation that they're involved in, then, it's more an issue of why was he so uncomfortable if he was trained for things like this, or if he wasn't trained properly for this, whose issue does that fall to? And then it could have been justified if Castillo was actually reaching for a gun, even though, as far as we know, he was not. But that is also a possibility. And then marijuana was found in the mason jar inside of the vehicle when it was searched after the incident was over. And then Yanez did use this defense in court that if Castillo would keep drugs and smoke around his 4-year-old daughter, disregarding the risk that poses to her, then what regard did Castillo have for Yanez's life in this situation? Outcomes: November 16, 2016, John Choi of the Ramsey County Attorney's Office said that Yanez would be charged with 3 felonies, 2 accounts of dangerous discharge of a firearm, and then 1 account of second-degree manslaughter. Yanez was acquitted on all charges on June 16th of the following year, but on that same day, the city of St. Anthony did fire Yanez. And as far as I can find, he does not have another law enforcement job. Questions are that why was the firearm still deep in Castillo's pocket, according to a paramedic, if Yanez claimed he could see Castillo's grip and that it was like he was holding a gun, and then later claimed during trial that he did see a gun? Does this speak to the officer's x-ray vision? Does he have some sort of power to know that that was what Castillo was trying to get to? And then why did his story change so drastically, and why was he allowed to change his story so drastically? Why did Yanez feel the need to use deadly force if the gun was not visible and still in the pocket of the victim? He wasn't aware of where the gun was, and I understand that the situation was very high stress and everything like that, but how did he know that the gun was in the pocket? That was not found out until it was removed from his pocket by a police officer before paramedics took Castillo to the hospital. And then why did Yanez not attempt to back away from the vehicle, create some space with himself and the threat, and then kind of attempt to get Castillo out of the car and control the situation without discharging a weapon? It definitely did happen very fast in the dashcam footage. Castillo discloses he has a gun, and 5 seconds later those shots ring out. And obviously I don't have any law enforcement training. I don't, do this on a daily basis. Yanez was a 4-year veteran of this police department, but at the same time, Castillo was calm throughout the stop. He was very upfront about the fact that he had a weapon. Him and his girlfriend said they both were not reaching for it, so it just kind of is in question of Yanez's mental state about the situation and everything like that. And then back to Yanez's accounts of what happened, why did the prosecution fail to bring up the interview with the other officer that's at 810 in the dashcam footage where Yanez admits he never saw a gun? This evidence would have shown that Yanez changed his story multiple times to aid his defense that could potentially have gotten a conviction for Yanez because his actions in this situation were deemed wrongful enough to be charged with manslaughter and 2 counts of dangerous discharge of a firearm. And then why did Yanez not wait for the other nearby officers to make the stop, since initially he was going to pull the car over because they resembled robbery suspects? This goes back to the felony traffic stop issue, and who knows if that would have actually helped or not, but it would have been nice to know why he did not wait, especially because sometimes when you see even regular traffic stops, there are 2 cars with 4 police officers. One is backup, and 1 car where the 2 officers are the main partners on the stop. And then why would Yanez shoot into a car where there's a 4-year-old girl in the back seat? Whether he felt threatened or not, his initial account said he didn't see the gun, he didn't know where the gun was. So why would you shoot towards a man where there was a 4-year-old sitting less than 2 feet behind him? So for connections to class materials, it is unethical to use deadly force for a traffic stop simply because there was a firearm in the car, which at the time was in the victim's pocket and did not pose an immediate threat to the officer. Though the exact motive is only known to Officer Yanez, it could be an example of the officer's personal ethics and values, which cause him to react based on his personal feelings instead of professional judgment with a clear mind. Meaning that race could have played into the ethics of this stop, because the victim was black and Yanez could have felt threatened by being presented with a black man in possession of a firearm, even though Yanez is Latino and a minority race himself. This was never brought up, and as far as I can find, there was no discussion about this, but it definitely is a possibility and would be interesting to know if it did play a part in this situation, because they both are minority races, and if that is an issue here. The Minnesota Police Department, and this is kind of separate from the issue, which is why it wasn't included in the information about the stop itself, but this was at least the second time in a very short amount of time that the St. Anthony's Police Department and the police department in Minnesota was part of an issue that occurred with a man of African American descent. So, was it something that kind of poisoned their police departments? Was it an issue that he learned from working in these police departments? That's all unknown, could be speculated, but we're definitely unsure of at this point based on the information that we were able to find. These are our sources, and that's it. And then the officer's failed attempt to help Castillo after he was shot could have been an example of their professional ethics, since they are to protect and serve. Yanez was in shock after the incident, so not to give him a free pass, but you did just shoot someone 7 times in the chest. That's really not something that a lot of people just walk away from. And his partner was on scene and did nothing after or during the incident except grab the little girl who climbed out of the car. And then nothing was done to aid Castillo until 5 minutes later when paramedics arrived. And then back to the issue of the 4-year-old's life. Was it an ethical violation to shoot into a car putting her life in danger? I understand that Yanez, in his own mind, was doing this to protect himself, but how is shooting into a car with a 4-year-old less than 2 feet away from the person that you're dealing with a decent or good idea? How is that not putting an unnecessary life in danger? She's 4 years old. I don't think that's very fair to her, especially because she had no idea what was going on. And, what if a bullet did end up hitting her? What if something happened with that? But that's a whole other issue. Obviously didn't happen. Getting a little far away from what we're actually talking about here, but basically the consensus for connection to class material is that race have possibly played a role, and what would that role be? Did the officers failing to administer medical aid until paramedics arrived? Is that an ethical issue there? And basically, another thing could be, was it ethical of the police department to train Yanez in the way that he was, because this did happen and there was a reputation in Minnesota around this time about unnecessary force? And yeah, so